Facilities Building Committee meeting of, August 14th, 2024. If you could, I'm going to call to order the meeting at, I believe it's 7:02. And if you could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to do a quick roll call. I'll remind our members that our clerk is on speakerphone, so to identify yourself when you're speaking would be very helpful for her, although she will watch it on television. So let me switch my glasses so I can actually see. So Lori Hayes O'Brien, I'm here, Gia. John Cantafio is not here this evening. Mike Buswell is not here yet. We will let you know if he comes. Rich Kroll.
Here.
Thank you. Christine Alaris. Here. Dean Fabrizio is not here. Ron Feligno.
Here.
Dave Galla.
Here.
Kelly Malozzi is not here this evening. Matt Sather.
Here.
Tony Silber is not here yet. Gia, I will let you know if any of the other members come in. Thank you. Next on our agenda is public comments, but I'm going to just make a short public comment myself. After seeing many of you at the last few meetings, I wanted to just give a couple points to the members who weren't able to be there and to clarify a couple things that were discussed, mainly at the town council meeting last week, and just to give kind of everybody an overview who are new to this project. So quickly, this is the first time as a committee we are discussing the Grace Church property. You knew at our last meeting that we agreed that we would ask the architects who are here this evening to take a look at it once the town owns it. And this is really our first swipe at discussing that and getting some input. I want to clarify from everyone too, I thought I would read what our resolution is, just so you know what our committee is supposed to be doing as opposed to what the town has done in reference to this property. But our resolution reads that our purpose is to develop options to create up-to-date, useful, and cost-effective space for a senior and community center to better serve the community. So that's been the purpose of this committee since it was formed. Wanted to make that clear. I think there was some confusion about that. A couple other things that I know came up a lot that we'll be discussing further, but just if they're in your comments, and hopefully this will give you some clarification. As with any building committee, we will have to do a traffic study. I know there's been a lot of discussion of that. We will absolutely do it during school hours and peak hours. There's a formula for that. I know I discussed that at the meeting the other night, so I wanted to make that clear to people who were asking about it. Same for any environmental studies. Those are requirements, so there's no need to request them because they're required, and we'll have to do them as a committee and hire people to do that. I know there's been some confusion out there about what we've been working towards for people who haven't paid attention to the project until now. We are not building a in-sports or recreation center. There's no plan for a pool or a trailhead or any outdoor courts and basketball courts, et cetera, outdoor kind of recreational activities. I know there's a lot of concern for residents for that as far as overflow parking, about things going on in the parking lot. Up till now, and I believe it will still be our purpose to stay within those guidelines, so I wanted that out there for some of you that have been discussing it. There seems to be a lot of confusion about what a senior/community center is, and I think what we've been trying to describe to people at most points is our focus in creating the components of this building have been based on a lot of the senior center needs, what they don't have now, what they're lacking of, beyond just the building and its disrepair, but the things that we've seen in other senior centers and we think Trumbull is needing. All those components are what make up the building that we've been discussing for the last blah, blah, blah years. The community center portion of it comes in the fact that, and I know there was a gentleman who said it the other day, that to have a building like that and at 2 o'clock mainly have everything stop and have it be empty isn't cost-effective or reasonable to ask of the town. So the community center aspect of it is how we look at it that way. I think a lot of people, when they hear community center, I think there was my sense from hearing people was that this was going to be another in sports, another recreational center. That's not how we've been looking at it or talking about it. This is, again, going to be starting from scratch in some ways and using what we've already had, but I just want to make clear kind of a definition of what we're talking about here. When people say only build a senior center, well, the components of the building we're talking about are a senior center. The gym is necessary. It's not what they have now, but they need it, and that will always be part of it. So I wanted to clarify that for some people. I know in talking to some residents that was confusing. Parking spaces, our architects are very skilled at figuring out how many parking spaces any kind of center like this would need. I know there's concern about overflow parking. That is something we'll always be conscientious of. About not having parking on neighboring streets is something that we would never want to see happen. And so I know people have been concerned about that. I wanted that to kind of be out there, that's something we're really aware of. There's a couple other points that we can probably, as we're going on, talking about, but I just wanted, before people made public comments, to kind of clear up some of those misconceptions. The last thing I'll say is that we were absolutely planning on having neighborhood meetings that will have more back and forth. We had a meeting at the senior center a few months back that was very informative. Those are the kind of meetings that we'll plan on having. But this is kind of day one of this committee being able to look at this site, as whether it's feasible for this project. So just want to get that out there. The next thing I'll say as far as public comments, I'm going to ask you to be concise, respectful, give your name and address. If someone's already said what you're going to say, just try not to be as repetitive as you can. Everybody obviously has a right to whatever they're saying, but we're hearing you. It's just we want to be able to keep moving and get some information back to you. And so if we're hearing the same things over and over, it probably isn't really going to serve anyone's purpose. So with that, I'll start. I know some people wrote their names down. I'll give an open call for public comments as well. I will, again, ask you to keep it as close to 2 to 3 minutes as you can. We're going to try to wrap it up. I keep looking at that clock. I need to stop. We'll wrap it up in a reasonable time so that we can continue with the meeting. So that being said, I believe the first person is Laurel Walsh. I'll do my best to read these names. And public comments will start at, do we have a time? 7:09.
Good evening. Laurel Walsh, 5944 Main Street. The town of Trumbull closes tomorrow on 5948 Main Street, the former Grace Church Parish. We welcome you and hope you consider every concern stated tonight. 2 recent accidents have occurred on Main Street near Grace Church. July 27th in front of Edgewood Avenue and August 7th at the Main and Churchill intersection. Fortunately, there were no injuries. However, this stretch of Main Street becomes problematic once school returns to session. It's very common for cars to drive through our school bus's stop sign at the bus stop. Crossing Main Street in either direction can be very time-consuming and might be difficult for an elderly driver. In closing, I'd like to say a few things on behalf of our neighbors. That we'd like the committee to understand we are not against you. We have many uncertainties, but we feel the administration already has answers to what will become. From the beginning, the administration led us to believe a senior center was the goal. We quickly learned that was not true. We understand that a community center is the ultimate goal, and if so, why is there a need to try and deceive from the beginning? Could it be that you know what it would do to our neighborhood? As all of you would be, our neighborhood is committed to ensuring that this project is accomplished with minimal impact on our neighborhood's value, character, and above all else, safety. Thank you.
Looks like Brian Walsh.
Good evening, committee members. Brian Walsh, 5944 Main Street. I'm here tonight as part of the Main Street and Edgewood Avenue neighborhood group. While we do not own the church land, our properties do abut it directly. As a group, we intend to work collaboratively with the town and the building committee to preserve the integrity of this neighborhood. by building a sensible senior center that envelops the surrounding landscape and complements it instead of damaging it. I have trepidations about the scale of the building that will encompass this 6-acre lot. The current Trumbull Senior Center is approximately 20,000 square feet. How much of an increase does this new site require? How will the architects blend this large-scale structure into the contour of the land? The property lines have very light vegetation that blocks the view of the church, but only for half the year. We have strong concerns about setbacks and how much light pollution will be seen. This group is concerned about increased traffic. The Main Street traffic can be intimidating to merge into. The lot only has one viable in and out, which will funnel increased traffic directly onto Main Street. The hours for senior centers in the area finish by 4 p.m. on weekdays. This is a reasonable time for the senior center to be used. If we had a community center, will there be weekend and evening use now? My last concern is how the property will be secured. Will there be a physical barrier to block the parking lot's use after hours? I know that I'm not alone with these fears. I want to work together to develop a way to communicate information between our groups. I would also like to extend another offer to anyone on the committee involved with this project to come and walk the grounds with the neighbors. We are glad to share stories and concerns of the neighborhood. As a good friend of mine once said, this property is an island in the middle of a beautiful residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Gil?
Mark McKeel, 27 Edgewood Avenue. Good evening, Madam Chairwoman, committee members. Would it be okay if I handed out a smaller copy of my map?
Yep.
Thank you so much. Just give you guys a little depiction of the park. I have smaller copies for you folks. I think I made 12, so I have enough. So first I want to say thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for your comments and hearing our concerns. We do appreciate that. If I've appeared confrontational in the past, I apologize. My wife even told me to put the speaker farther away because I talk too much. So let me just give you a little background of where we are, why we're here. As neighbors of the Grace Episcopal Church property, we have spoken in favor of the town's purchase of the property to protect it from private, high-density development. We're grateful to the First Selectwoman and the town that took the opportunity to do this. Now it's the town's responsibility to do what's in the best interest of the property's future land use and to protect the property values of our longtime residential neighborhood. We don't feel the right thing to do is try and plug and play Hardy Lane Community Center design into this 6.04 acres. Our goal here this evening is to provide some understanding and information of the property to your committee, and we hope you'll find it valuable and take it into consideration. We think of this property as an island surrounded by a residential neighborhood. This is obviously the item in red. You moved it on me, you got me all screwed. The item in red is the property, and you can see it's surrounded by homes and the Long Hill Village, the 55-plus senior community. As a result of the July 10th Community Facilities Building Committee meeting, a walk and talk of our neighborhood was conducted on Thursday, July 18th, starting at the church site. Attending was committee member and D6 District 6 Representative Kelly Malozzi, D6 Representative Steve Lemoyne, ZBA committee member Kim DeCorpo, and our 123rd District State Representative David Ritigliano, and 30 neighbors. We felt it was informative, and we would offer to do this again for the full Community Facilities Building Committee, as well as any other town officials. I served 9 years on inland wetlands, and I learned that walking the property and in this case with vested neighbors, should be a requirement as part of the initial exploration for future property development. We do know that many people, likely several committee members, have driven through the property and on Edgewood Avenue. We've seen a lot of traffic increase. Please remember that currently the trees are in full bloom, and over 140 years of natural buffering makes this at first glance appear to be a very attractive location. We would just like to remind the committee members that we will live here long after the leaves are off the trees, with a full view of any new buildings, the incoming and outgoing vehicle traffic, parking lots, lights at night, extended hours of operation, the loitering and littering that could go along with this facility, the noise and displacement of the wildlife, our property values. Say it again, our property values are at stake here. Please take our concerns into consideration. We acknowledge the town needs a senior center. We open with open arms. We encourage creativity of design and reuse of the existing buildings, and welcome a dedicated senior center run by the current social services department with similar hours of operations as the current senior center. We feel that that will maintain the character of our neighborhood and the approximately 13 abutting properties on Edgewood Avenue and Main Street, and then the 71 abutting residents located next door in the Long Hill Village, 55 and over senior community. We are opposed to Parks and Recreation running a community center in this residential neighborhood with extended hours, and we are opposed to a sports gymnasium. Why? It has a basketball court, and going off QA&M's architectural drawings that we've seen released for Hardy Lane, specifically on sheet A4.0, the planned seating capacity is 65 people per section of bleacher. There are 4 sections for a maximum seating of 260 people. It's not the spot for 260 people, not the spot for 130 people. I'm not going to go into all the other things that Madam Chairwoman covered in her speech, but I guess the biggest question I have is that there's been a commitment made by the First Selectman and others that they'll work collaboratively with the neighbors to resolve problems. We'd like to know when and how exactly that working collaboratively will happen. When the town builds on town-owned property, there is no requirement to follow planning and zoning regulations. None. No oversight, as there is a residential or commercial structure. Is there a peer review? And I got to be careful because they're right behind me. Is there a peer review process for the architectural best practices design? For example, will the lights from the vehicles entering and leaving the facility at night shine into our homes or into the Long Hill Village senior residences? Will there be light posts in the parking lots lighting up the neighborhood at night? Will there be sufficient parking so that the overflow parking doesn't spread to our street? Because people aren't going to go up to Main Street and then walk over. They're going to cut through our yards. We have so many questions. Who are the experts responsible for asking and resolving these types of questions and concerns collaboratively well before the first tree is cut or the shovels put in the ground? Just to address quickly the outdoor sports center. There is on a earlier release of the Hardy Lane property, and I've attached it in a package I would like to present to the committee for the record tonight. There is a option on there for an outdoor court. I have it here. I will hand this package unless you want me to email it to the clerk.
Actually, I'm going to ask you to kind of finish up. 'Cause
Okay.
6.5 minutes. We've all have that in our own packets.
Okay.
Oops, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
So-
And those are the things we'll continue to discuss.
Okay, because there is a blank spot on the map for the same type of outdoor activity. So with that, I will invite you all again, and you can coordinate it through me since I seem to wear the badge of honor of the ringleader of the community. If you'd like to walk the neighborhood as a group, we would be thrilled to take you into some people's backyards and properties and show you why we just don't think this is a great spot for a community center. great spot for a senior center, but not a community center. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
I just want to clarify to our committee members, because someone asked me earlier, and I wasn't sure if the rest of you are aware, we were not made aware of that gathering and whatever that week was. I wasn't aware of it, and I don't think it came out to any of those. So anybody that thinks they missed it, that it came to us, it didn't. So it will happen again in the future, I'm sure, but I just wanted committee members to know that you didn't miss an email. Okay. Next up is it Richard Wecker? And Elizabeth?
That's right. Hello, my name is Elizabeth Wecker. I have been a resident at 16 Edgewood Avenue for the past 39 years. Our property directly abuts the former.
And I'm Richard Wecker, her
Sorry.
husband.
Sorry.
You want to just pull the microphone down so we can?
Sure.
Thank you.
Our property directly abuts the former Grace Church property. Yes, the former Grace Church property, which I find an incredible statement to make. When we chose to buy our home next to the church, we had every reasonable expectation that the church would never be anything but a church. It was a congregation, an established denomination. It had been there for many years. They were great neighbors. We had mutual respect for each other. Never in a million years did I think I'd be facing a time when the property would be sold to the town, no less, for them to now use in any way they see fit, and 50 feet from my kitchen window. My husband and I have no plans to move. We've just completed a 900 square foot, 2-story addition to our home to better accommodate our family now that we have growing grandchildren who visit frequently. We are certainly settled in for the foreseeable future. Timing is everything. So the fate of the former Grace Church property is very, very much a concern of ours. I don't understand why the original church building is not even being considered as a location for the proposed senior center. I read the first selectman's statement saying that the buildings are all likely to be torn down. I understand that the church needs updating, but I find it hard to believe that it's more fiscally responsible to tear down the building and build an entirely new one rather than retrofitting the existing one. It's a stone and brick structure, after all. I keep hearing about the need for a senior center and welcome that as a proposed use for the former Grace Church property, but everything I read about the new project seems to have much more emphasis on community center and less emphasis on a home for our deserving seniors. I feel like we're being Trojan horsed here. Are we being appeased with the notion that the town has plans to build a nice place for our elderly to gather when, in fact, a truer, much less desirable plan is afoot? I have yet to see the plans which are being presented tonight, so I reserve judgment, but a community center and a senior center are not equivalent in terms of hours of operation, noise, traffic, etc. And I believe that we are, at the very least, deserve transparency in the town's true plans for the former Grace Church property, plans which seem to already be very much in place. I feel that we are owed at least this much consideration and honestly, much, much more, because, my friends, this is YIMBY we're facing, and that is, yes, in my backyard, and in the realest possible sense of the phrase for the residents of Edgewood Avenue and the other abutting properties. I ask all of you for your due diligence in deciding the fate of this property and to approach this project as if it were YIMBY for you as well. Thank you.
And I just wanted to say one thing about the traffic. It has increased dramatically over the last few years. And the cars, when they go up and down Main Street, especially coming south out of Monroe, come at very high speed. There's no traffic light. I very rarely see any police out there policing it. Once in a very long while do I see somebody pulled over. And yes, there are multiple accidents, and I fear that there are going to be a large increase of that kind of activity. And again, it's to me and the neighbors, it is about the traffic up and down Main Street. It's hard to get out of our street. So that was my piece.
Thank you.
Next is Liz Jones.
Good evening. My name is Liz Jones. I live at 9 Pinehurst Street, one street over from where the community center / senior center is presumed to be built. I've lived there for 25 years with my retired U.S. Navy lieutenant husband. And I've said it at the last meeting, I really, really hope you guys come and tour our neighborhood, because I think you'll find that even though the church sits on a Main Street address, that church is in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I mean, like, backyards, you can touch the Little Red Schoolhouse practically from the Lillicrafts' backyard. You know, over the weekend, I did a little touring. I took a little tour up to Orange. They have a community center. It's on huge sprawling land. Same with Easton. So we're not against the senior center, but we're just asking, please don't cram a community center into this building. It's just not an appropriate space for it. And honestly, the town should want to do better. Go to other towns and see what they're doing. They're on sprawling acres of land where they do have outside courts, you know, where they can afford to put a swimming pool and a gym in the building. This is not the right site for that. Please come and tour our neighborhood, because I think if you guys live there, you would feel the same sadness and anger that we do. And I just want to make one last thing clear. In terms of there being people getting invited to tour our community, one of the committee members volunteered to do that. So this wasn't like some sort of secret plan. I just want to make that clear.
I shouldn't be back to public commenting, but I just wanted to be clear that committee members had asked why we weren't made aware of it. So it wasn't to imply that at all. I just wanted to make clear that this was not a committee invite, and that our intent is to do that. Just
Well,
that.
I do wish more committee members would come and walk through our neighborhoods. There just is not enough space to do this. The senior center, great. Community center, no way. No way. We're as is in the morning at 7 o'clock when I'm trying to make a left on Main Street. I'm waiting there 7 to 8 minutes to make a left. I mean, come on, guys. These are our homes. These are our property values. I'm just going to leave it at that. If this was your neighborhood, you'd be up here too. And I'm sad to say that this meeting is taking place on August 14th, which is probably the busiest vacation week of the year. And so a lot of our neighbors are not here right now to defend our neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
I think this says Richard White.
Richard White, 169 Churchill Road. First, I would like to thank the Building Committee for developing the following studies for Hardy Lane, the Phase 2 environmental site assessment. Tom has mentioned that this was a partial Phase 2, and George had mentioned that additional environmental testing would take place during the detailed design process, which appears to have been completed. Was additional environmental testing completed as requested by the Conservation Commission, and are those reports available? Second, the traffic study that was based on 3 times the current usage model for weekdays and a comparative facilities model during the weekend. This shows the impact that this would have at this location to any potential future development. And finally, the detailed design documents. For the detailed design documents, were cost estimates updated from the feasibility study? I don't see them in the agenda for tonight. And final report, and are those costs available? Was a cost estimate developed for moving or rerouting the sewer line that runs down Hardy Lane, and are those costs available? Finally, I would like to request 2 documents be published to the committee's website. First was the CAD design documents that I've asked for repeatedly that are associated with the new detailed design documents for Hardy Lane. Tom has already mentioned that these are a public work. They should be available to the public. I do not know why they have not been made available. I've been requesting well over a year. And I would like to request that the contract with QA&M be made available. There are members of this committee that have voted on this contract or had this contract put in front of them because of their role on Board of Finance and Town Council 3, 4, 5 times. I've never seen the contract. I don't think anybody in this room other than Tom and a town attorney have seen this contract. It's not in your agenda. It's not in Town Council agenda. It's not in Board of Finance agenda. It's not available. If I have missed it, let me know where it is. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else for public comment?
Patricia Kelly, 15 Gibson Avenue. My only comment is that I urge the building committee that's been doing this, maybe not the same people, since 2017, you've had 3 different neighborhoods come in front of you guys, and we're still doing this in 2024. You guys need to start thinking outside the box, and we have plenty of open space, and there's no reason why we can't utilize or think about other options, which I believe you had maybe 8 to 10 in a list somewhere. But it's just a new neighborhood, a new address, and it's time to start taking into consideration that these are taxpayers. They deserve more respect. Thank you.
Yes. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, so seeing none, I'm going to close public comment at, 7:34. Thank you. So next agenda item is approval of the July 10th, 24 meeting minutes. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
That was Rich Kroll, Gia. That's okay. And a second?
Ron Fligno, I second.
Thank you. Any changes, questions? I'm not making any changes this time, so I think we're good to go. All those in favor of approval of the 7/10/24 meeting minutes, please raise your hand. Any noes and abstentions? So Gia, everybody here was a yes, and Dave Gallo was an abstention. You're welcome. And we are going to move on to a project discussion with our architects. Tom Arcari and Rocco Petito are here from QA&M Architecture to kind of start a discussion. These are not plans per se, but a discussion on what we've done in the past and how this may or may not work out into this property. So I'm going to reiterate again, anything you're seeing is just our first look at it, and it's for discussion purposes only. There's nothing here that has been decided on or plans that any of us have been aware of. So this is kind of just a launching pad, I believe. And I'll turn it over to you guys.
Great. Good evening, Tom Arcari, QA&M Architecture, 195 Scott Swamp Road, Farmington, Connecticut. Screen's awesome. So I'd just like to point out to the committee that I have received direction from the committee, and I'm acknowledging it. We've been directed to stop work and exploration at the Hardy Lane site as of this point. So we've put those activities on hold, and we've submitted documentation that we've produced to date in association with that contract, and you have that in your hands. We are no longer doing any work on the Hardy Lane site. I was approached by the town with the idea that they were considering purchasing the Grace Church property, and would we take a look at it to do some diligence. We have executed some diligence at our courtesy to the community. We are not under any amendment to our agreement to execute any services at the Grace Church property at this time. It's my understanding that transaction still has not officially occurred. However, we did do some diligence to inform the community what our thoughts were about the property in relation to the other properties that were previously available, and what is the viability of a senior center and senior and community center to be located at the Grace Church property. This is a diagram you've probably seen many different times. It looks at all of the different town-owned properties that have been considered for senior community center over the last 8 years that we've been studying this for the community. And what I'd like to point out is the location of the Grace Church site on the map now is circled in orange. It is demographically right in the sweet spot. And when we found out this was a possible location, from a location standpoint, I informed the town administrators and the committee members that we thought that this site would score very well from our rating and ranking potential. It's a good location. It's big enough to accommodate the program. It is right on a Main Street corridor. The site currently has an assembly use on the site, which can have well more than 300 occupants at any given time. There are many other buildings of similar use on that corridor. The site is directly adjacent to an active adult residential community, which makes this a fantastic resource to that community and the neighborhood adjacent. It would be a superb walking resource for the neighborhood. We think the location is great in terms of its response time for all of the neighborhoods of Trumbull, and ultimately, if and when the town purchases the property, we would extend our assessment of the site in the same way that we did the other sites. So we would rate and rank it, and I'm extremely confident that it would rate quite well. It's directly adjacent to, you could walk to the town campus. There is a crossing at the intersection of Trumbull and Main Street, and it's a controlled crossing. And relative to the traffic conditions and the lines of sight at this property are much better than the Hardy Lane traffic and lines of sight, and there is a controlled intersection at one end. There was some talk about a traffic study after the town purchases the property. Any future exploration of this site would include a new traffic study of this corridor, the adjacent intersections, and as such. I've included a map of the GIS map of the parcel, which we have shaded. This looks very similar to the map you saw earlier this evening presented by one of the neighbors. You can see that the church sits very much in the center of the site. It is surrounded by basically pavement areas, access areas, parking areas. And in the upper left corner of the site is a separate building which houses some classrooms and the daycare programming. At the rear of the site, to the right, is the rectory church property, and then at the far end of the site are 5 or 6 separate parcels that are a part of the site. To the south is the active adult community. Along Main Street, there are a couple residences in between this parcel and the Parks and Rec building, Communities Parks and Rec building. And then along Edgewood Road to the north of this are residences. So we did an exercise just to identify the viability of putting the Senior and Community Center here on the site. I want to point out to your committee that, again, we haven't been contracted to do this. We're doing this as a courtesy, and that this is just a diagram. It's based on some of the other work we've done to determine how a site might be developed. So this is a diagram that we put together that shows the building in the bottom, sort of towards the left of the site. The building would be similar in configuration to the building that had been designed for the Hardy Lane site and the Churchill Lane site, Churchill Road site. Most of the senior center programming elements would be on the first floor. It would be a 2-story type scheme because the property slopes away. Actually, from Main Street, the property climbs to a spot where the church currently is, and then it slopes away significantly towards the back of the site. We would anticipate moving the building closer to Main Street than where the church is currently located. In this diagram, you can see there's a circle behind the building, which is a drop-off and access area. That's where the church sits now. We think it would be strongest, the solution would be strongest if the building was pushed closer to Main Street and maintained the street front of the structures, street walled structures. There would be parking and drop off on the Main Street side of the site, and then there would be access to the rear of the site where there would be additional parking that could extend as far back to the site as needed. There's also the viability of pedestrian connections to the adjacent neighborhood if so desired. You can see in the middle of the parking area to the upper right of the slide, there is the outline of the rectory, just so you can have an understanding of where that building goes. We would anticipate very strong buffers to the neighbors north and south in any type of scheme we developed. As I mentioned, the site would be a 2-story plan, so behind the building would be parking, secondary access to the building, and then the building would have a center core where you could enter at both levels, and there would be an elevator connecting the levels of the building. With that, I will let Rocco talk a little bit about what the building might look like.
You know, I want to clarify one thing before it leaves my head. Similar to how we were looking at Hardy Lane, the front of the building would still be 1 story, the way you guys are seeing it now?
Yeah.
Okay, and
And
the back,
is going to be, we're trying to keep it 2 stories.
so it would be more underneath?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
we'll-
because
we'll get to
it
that.
looks different, okay.
Okay, so when we got this, the task we thought was just going to be to try and take what we had at Hardy Lane, so we didn't lose all of that work, to see if that program fit. As you see, the upper floor really didn't change much at all. That access is from the Main Street side. And as you work back to where the cafe was, we've had a much longer cafe at the Hardy Lane setup, so that portion has been kind of truncated. and then you have access to the lower levels from the rear end of the building. So we kept most of the program. The kitchen area got a little smaller, but as far as the classrooms, the library lounge, the admin, human services, arts and crafts, games room, those all stayed pretty much the same. Now, this is the kind of the rear entry, the mid-level entry, where the lower levels are more of the athletic levels or the activity levels. So we have a conference or admin area as you come in, the main entry there at the lobby. You have a stair where you can traverse either up or down to go to the senior center, classrooms and the lounge and the games room up, or go to the gym and the exercise dance room below. So as you come into the entry, you'll see the fitness room still essentially in the same place, overlooking the gym. And then what we were able to do is add kind of an indoor track. So this is very popular amongst seniors in that it's like they could go to the mall, but instead of going to the mall, they come to the senior center. They're able to have an interior walkway to get their steps in. Lower level. So we have a gym now at the Hardy Lane building. That gym was actually pulled out because the grades were so steep. We wanted to take up that grade with the building. Where in this case, we've pushed it all the way under the upper level. So it got a little, I guess, longer, but it's actually a little shorter this way in width. Or maybe it isn't. No, I guess it is about the same. It's a little bigger. So as you come down the stairs or you come down the elevator, you come into a lobby area with lockers, the exercise dance room, and then of course the gym and the main parks office that we had before. This is a section through the building to kind of understand, the verticality of it. You can see at the Main Street side, that's to your right, that the height of the building keeps its kind of one-story level that you saw at Hardy Lane. And then as the site traverses back, you can see how the access comes in on the mid-level, and actually the gym level is buried. So what that means is their egress from the gym would either be from the elevator or from 2 or 3 stairs to come back up to the mid-level to get out. So this is basically the computer model of what it would look like on the Main Street side. And because the back end is the part that changed so much on this building, I'm still working on it a lot, but you kind of get the idea of what we're trying to do. We're trying to find that sweet spot of where the site kind of comes in and you're left with a 2-story elevation at most in the back. And then you can see this is relatively unchanged. The big thing that's missing from the front is the drive-up canopy that is in the back. So that's it.
Ask questions.
So I'm going to go around are you ready for some questions, or you want to keep going?
Yeah, no, that would be great.
All right, I'll go around and jotted down some things, but why don't we start, and we'll just go in a circle. Any questions you guys have so far? Yeah. Okay, we'll go ladies first. Christine will start.
Okay, thanks. This is Christine L. Ayers. My first question is really, I liked that last schematic where you saw the 3D images of the height. I was just wondering, how does the height of the building appear from ground level to the height of the current church building? Like, is it relatively similar?
So
greater or lower?
at the front of from the Main Street side, our building is actually lower than the church peak of the church. The church was taller. And then if you go and walk the site, we've had the opportunity to walk the site in the neighborhood. The grade falls away. The church actually has a community assembly room underneath it, and then it has a 2-story worship hall above it. It's actually a very tall cathedral space. So it's similar in height at the back of the building, as this, configuration sort of proposes. This building is stretched out wider than the church. The existing church is narrower and deeper and sits further back on the property, and we're proposing to make the building wider and move it closer to Main Street.
So Tom, and thanks for you and Rocco for doing this for us. It's very helpful, and I'm sure there will be more iterations as we go through this.
Of course. It's just an idea.
Just under the guys. So, do we have any idea what the current church building square footage is, like with the buildings that are on that property right now?
I don't have it
I do.
offhand.
You do. Good.
Go ahead.
Let me, it's in here somewhere. I'll give some generals. The church building itself is somewhere around 10,000. Let's see, there was a total here somewhere. 10 and change. The school building was, I believe, 11 and change, 11,564. And the house in the back, where's the total for that? I wanted to say it was somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000. So it was generally almost 28,000 square feet for all three of the current buildings spread out,
28,000.
right?
Okay. And as we go through this, it would be interesting to me, because we did this on the Hardy Lane property, we've done this in several iterations here, to understand what the current impervious surface looks like versus what the proposed impervious surface would be. Obviously, as we go through this, that will be a part of this process, but that would be important to understand.
That's correct, yeah. And some of that depends on how much parking is provided, what configuration of parking is provided, how much is hardscape, how much is impervious scape.
With the current layout as presented, what sort of earth movement do you anticipate to achieve this multi-tiered building?
Well, we would try and balance the site, but in order to accommodate the gymnasium, there would be a fair amount of excavation. One of our thoughts was, to try and accommodate that soil on site, but it would probably be, a net removal of material to accommodate the gymnasium. Ron?
Is the gymnasium the prime requirement for the height of the gymnasium? Well, that's kind of silly. What I meant, because with the gym in place as you have it proposed, is that a necessity to have whatever height it will be? Does it have to be that height? Like, does it have to 30, 40 feet plus, or is it?
In this proposed concept, we actually set the building at approximately the finished floor of the church. So we depressed the gymnasium. We essentially pushed the gym down, and we pushed it down as far as we can, flex the height of the gym. It's just, if you're building a gym, it's ideal to have 22 to 24 feet clear under the structure, but that can vary a little bit if it's not a regulation. If it's just an activity space, you have some flexibility with that.
Well, the reason I was asking that, since the popularity of pickleball at the senior center, which is amazing, by the way, people wait on stage to get to play in the single court, and that's the reason why I was asking. If it's feasible, if it's primarily for pickleball, what would be the minimum height that would be required as opposed to a basketball court?
It's correct. It would be a little bit lower, but I'd have to get that exact ideal recommendation, clear height.
Well, I'm not trying to get specific, but is there any advantage to having a basketball court there? I mean, I know it's for the community aspect we're looking at, but is that a prerequisite at this point?
So if I could answer?
Yes, please.
So I think what we've been doing throughout the last, 8 years now, is trying to find a building that would accommodate a number of needs all in the same location. So I don't know that, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but I would prefer to see something that was able to be used for multiple activities rather than just one specific, currently very popular activity?
Well, basketball is a popular activity.
You're talking about pickleball.
I know, but I'm just saying. So is basketball for that matter.
Well, a gymnasium has been a part of the program for a long time. If
Right,
this
yeah.
committee chooses to change the program, that's, we'll work with the committee to revise the program. But gymnasium is a great resource, not just for the senior population, but for the community as a whole.
Are there any problems in digging down the depth to get the height of the basketball court?
We will have to do geotechnical testing as a part of this exercise, and that may determine what the construction challenges are to do that.
All right, I was just curious about that point. Thank you, Tom.
Richard Kroll. I'd also like to thank you for doing those mock-up designs. It's very helpful to see what that might look like on that site. So it's a very odd-shaped lot. Does that provide challenges to putting a building this size on this site?
Well, I guess that's a good point. Realistically, there's two configurations that would work for the building. One would be to make the building wide and face Main Street, and the second configuration would be to make it narrow and run front to back, similar to the church. We looked at putting the program in the existing church. I know that was a question we heard earlier tonight, but the program doesn't fit within the existing church. Forget the gym for a second. The senior center program doesn't fit, and the building's not in the greatest shape. So we've advised the community that if they're going to do a new senior center, community center at the site, and it's going to be a 50 to 100 year building, you should build a new building. But maintaining the street wall, moving the building to the front, and then using the narrow portion of the site, which is at the rear. You can see how the building reaches out and it becomes narrow between the active adult community and the Edgewood Lane residences. That narrow portion of the site works quite well for an efficient parking and access at the back of the site. So we think this would be the best configuration of the site, putting the building closer to Main Street and letting parking and access be at the rear of the site. No matter what the configuration of that parking is, or the amount of parking, or how it's technically developed from a size and lighting standpoint, etc. signage.
So you did look at the existing buildings and kind of assess them, both the church building and the school building?
Yes.
Okay. It does look very shoehorned in to the site at the front. That was my first impression in seeing it. Yeah, my other question was, would a different design be better, something that's longer and thinner in the front? I guess we'd have to think about that, or see what that might look like and how that would impact the parking and such. But thank you for putting that together. It's very helpful.
Matt Sather, again, thank you. That was very helpful. You mentioned buffering before. Could you give us a sense, just in a best practices, general sense of what that sort of buffering might be?
Yeah, so it could be many different things, of course, but in this configuration, more than likely it would be a combination of fencing and plantings. Realistically, one of the neighbors made a good point. We don't want headlights, shining into our neighborhood. Well, the best way to prevent that is to provide a fence of some nature, along the length of the parking area, and then it could be, complemented with all sorts of plantings or shrubbery, so that there's a strong buffer, just not physically, but also green buffer as well. You could also see in this concept, we've essentially left the what is the east side of the site undeveloped. So back where those parcels are, we would stay away from that side of the site. There isn't really a need to develop that.
Wetlands.
Okay, I have a couple, and then if anybody wants to circle back around, please feel free. My first thought after seeing some of Rocco's drawings is the footprint compared to where we are at Hardy Lane. Has that, the actual footprint, not just square foot, but the footprint, that's reduced greatly?
That's correct.
Okay.
I wouldn't say greatly. I would say we've reduced it about 15%.
Okay. And this will be in time with, we can address this, but if there are any other opportunities to reduce that more greatly.
Yeah, I think there are opportunities. One of the things we talked about was putting the Human Services Department at the mid-level. That would help us reduce the footprint a little bit. Arts and crafts could, go to the mid-level. The footprint could shrink a little.
So that was kind of when I was looking at the picture with the gray area, right? I don't know if you can flip to that.
I'm sorry, which one?
I think we were probably looking at the bottom level.
This one?
Yeah.
So
Is
yeah.
opportunity in that bigger gray space to move some things from the upper level, does that give us an ability to kind of not make it as wide?
That's correct. So
Okay.
that's a good point. For instance, the human services programming and the arts and crafts programming could be moved to the mid-level of the plan.
And then
and that would reduce the width of the building by a pretty significant amount.
'Cause I think that was everybody's first thought process. The seeing it from the front level, that's always been something we've been trying to achieve and works even better here. As you said, it's shorter than the church is. And obviously, we won't have the height we would have had on Hardy Lane because the slope is different and we're actually going underneath. But if we can get a little bit more of a narrow, by use of some of that empty space, one, it'll cut down on footprint and square footage overall, which is also a reduction in costs,
Very
hopefully.
good idea. Very good idea. And obviously, as we, ultimately explore this further, that's a good idea. And again, please keep in mind that this exercise was to explore the viability of the site's use.
And I will echo what everyone has said all along. We are so appreciative of your patience and your creativity and how well you guys have always gone along with this and to kind of get some of the feedback. But I think that was my first sense, is that space in our last iteration at Hardy Lane, we really had every space kind of taken, and to see some of those things be able to shrink and still really create the senior center that we need and the spaces that can be used in other ways as well. Can you talk, I know you talked a little bit, I believe Matt asked about buffering and lighting. I think when we talked last time, I think people go out, we were standing outside with a few neighbors out here, and there's kind of lampposts with lightings going on. What is that? The approach to that is different now, right? Like as far as lighting in a building, if it has nighttime activity, I think we talked last time about lights heading down and those kind of things. Are those the kind of things we're still focusing on to protect the neighborhood?
There are lots of different ways to light the site. Of course, the site would have to be dark sky compliant.
Right.
But you do have to meet minimum parking lot lighting requirements, which can be minimized or could be potentially greater near the rear of the building and can taper off further away from the building. There are some, life safety, requirements that you need to be sensitive to. But I think there's also, some communities regulate timeframes when, the lighting is on and lighting is off. There are opportunities for discussion regarding how the parking lot is lit and what are its extents, how the buffer is. Do to use very low height lighting poles, and if the buffer is high enough, you try and sort of reduce sight lines to those, especially if they're zero bleed light fixtures.
And then you talked a little bit about fencing but also adding more greenery, things like that. So I think people think fence and you get worried of the aesthetics of that, right? So what are kind of the options? How do you make that look pretty?
There are lots of ways that could be done. Combinations of stone and wood. Again, that's really a cost item. It can be a real attribute to the project if it's committed.
And my final one is just, we kind of looked at what the components were in our last meeting. Are you guys confident with just this first draw at this, that we're covering the needs of the senior center that we've been created for the last 8 years, and feel like we've really haven't left anything off that's been, and actually I love the idea of the walking track as an addition, but nothing that we feel like we've lost in potentially looking at this different site.
No, in this configuration, the footprint meets and exceeds the program requirements.
Anybody else? Ron?
Aesthetically speaking, which I think was mentioned before, the current proposal at Hardy Lane has a nice look to it. The current proposed building seems to have a relatively nice look also. What would the possibility of rotating the building 90 degrees do? Like you had mentioned before, I think it would be longer. It could be the same footprint, just rotated 90, which would buy more buffering on either side.
Just at the ends of the building. We looked at it. This configuration functionally works better, but we could, look at that as an option as well. One of the goals is to try and get as much parking directly adjacent to the building, and when you turn the building the other way, providing access ways by the building gets tight, so there's very little parking essentially at the front and back of the building. There would be a road by the building on each side. Whereas in this configuration, we can get a fair amount of parking right up against the building at the front and at the back.
Okay. What's the anticipated width as opposed to the anticipated length of the building? The actual footprint?
Oh, I don't have that exact information for you.
Because there's a possibility if it's rotated 90 degrees, it may buy an additional 1 lane of parking on the left and the right of the building. I know it would impact the parking to the rear of the building, which would now be the other end of the building. But might there not be an acceptable trade-off? And I'm just groping for an alternative for the building, make it somewhat more acceptable than it is.
It's possible.
I think one thing to think about, though, is the length that someone has to walk from a parking lot, right? Like, seniors are not generally folks that want to walk a long distance from where they park their car. So I think that has to be a big consideration, which seems like that's part of what was in your thought process originally when you went in this direction.
Yes.
Are we allowed to?
Could we?
I'm sorry.
Could we see the footprint again, Tom, of the building as it is now? 'Cause I don't envision parking on the side of it yet. But if it were rotated, it seems to me that you might buy some parking on the new front and the new back, sitting in a 90-degree rotation, which would make it a relatively shorter walk for possibly a few more people than the way it is now.
So I'm just going to remind, and I think we talked about this in a couple different ways. A couple people asked that question. Now I want to remind that this is a first shot. That this is out of the goodness of their hearts, and giving us some ideas. I think we can continue to talk about some of the things, whether it's shrinking it, keeping it facing forward and shrinking it. We can talk about that, but I think going into detail about that now, we don't have the information that we'd need to be able to do that.
Right, I appreciate that, but it's just, again, just throwing out some ideas for
No, that's fine.
consideration.
That's
So-
fine.
And by the way, Tom, I forgot to say thank you for your efforts. I noticed everyone else did and I didn't, but now I did.
We knew you meant it, Ron. You're good. You're good. Anything else that you would like to hear from us? I know we be in talks with the town as far as creating a new contract to take a look at this. So that's kind of first steps before we get into any of the nitty gritty that we're getting in. So this is a pencil draft and gave us a lot more information than even I could have anticipated. So we're really grateful. But anything else, Tom or Rocco, that you need to hear from the committee at this point?
No, thank you.
I will stress to the committee, to the members of the community, QA&M has been here from the beginning and knows this project and what its needs are more than most people would ever imagine. And we are grateful and trustful of them doing their best to understand and to be responsible to Trumbull as a community as a whole, not just to a building. So again, we appreciate your work and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
The only other thing I'm going to ask you about, because I did have it on the agenda, and you kind of began by saying we are a stop at Hardy Lane, a pause at Hardy Lane right now. I did include with the agenda information that Rocco had sent that kind of completed the schematic design so that that part is done. It doesn't seem meaningful to be discussing that at length right now because it's not really where we're at, but it's something that everybody will have the information for. It's on the website. And if people want to, as we move on, potentially to the site or end up going back to Hardy Lane to really start to understand that, we'll go into that into more detail at another time if necessary. Right. Good. And then my final thing is, if you will just send this presentation, I'll have Gia attach it to the minutes. Maybe write draft of big words against it, because I want to be clear that this is just a beginning sketch of ideas, although a well done one.
Great.
So, thank you. Thank you for your time. Okay. So moving on, our last item before adjournment is new business, and we have an invoice that you all were sent, and it refers specifically to the schematic design I was just discussing as part of the last contract. Let's see if I can find a number here. It is invoice number 16350 in the amount of $75,000. If I could have someone to motion acceptance of that, payment for that.
So moved. Dave Gallo.
And
Can I
sec-
ask a question first?
Let's do a second, then you can ask a question.
Okay.
Christina Lara, second.
Go ahead. Okay. Rich.
So this invoice was for 90% completion. So my question is, what is the other 10% of what would be being done if we were continuing with the Hardy Lane project?
Some of the work not completed as a part of our task order it was the preparation of the final cost estimate of the design development documentation or schematic design documentation. That's one of the services that would have been exercised if we move forward, as well as coordination of any other owner required investigations or testing, which also were brought to a halt at this time.
Okay, and in there, it looked like you had an engineering company, I guess, that did a report on some of the structure that would be needed for
Yep, so there
for
are
this building?
structural diagrams in the building. There's a mechanical system diagram and narrative, very detailed architectural drawings, as well as the site civil drawings were brought to a very high level of completion. So as a part of the SD exercise, normally the site drawings would not have been brought as far along as we did them. There were so many questions about the site development, impervious coverage, how is the storm drainage going to be treated. So what we did is we adjusted our task order, and we did a little bit less on the structural and mechanical side and significantly more on the site engineering side. So the site engineering documents were vetted by town staff and the engineering staff and the Conservation Commission, were brought to a very high level of detail so that moving forward we could answer not only to this committee but to the public a lot of some of the more detailed questions we had been hearing about how is the site going to be developed. So the site engineering package is significantly well developed.
I did go through it. It did look well developed. So you did have everything at this point you needed to start doing cost estimates. That's all that was remaining to do.
And the cost estimates would have been done at a higher level of detail than the previous cost estimates. We didn't anticipate the cost going down by any means. Usually what happens is when we develop the details to a higher level, there's a lot more information. Cost estimator can put a more accurate estimate together, but usually there's project creep in the development and the documentations. So then you have to go through a process of reconciliation of the costs and how can we value engineer if we have to. But there's a lot of information in that SDDD estimate, which hasn't been prepared.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so we have a motion for invoice number 16350. All those in favor? Or any other discussion I should ask first? Or Rich, you're good? Everybody good? Okay. All those in favor? And it's unanimous for you, Gia. Thank you. I had one other thing that I wanted to make clear. Oh, I know there's been some numbers put out there and about what's been spent so far. So these are always available through the finance department, as are any contracts available through town hall. But I just wanted to clarify some of that, and I'm going to give you some rough numbers as of up till July 30th. So what are we at? August 14th. This project has been going on, as many of you know, since 2015, more or less. So the first iteration with the previous committee, not our committee, the previous committee, they spent about $151,000 getting up to the point they were at. When this committee started, which was late 2017, up until the current time, we have to date spent $181,000. So I know there's been bigger numbers out there. I just wanted you, and these I can, you can easily get from finance. When I first saw them and I saw a 2025 number on it, I got confused, but then I remembered July 1st is when they start their year. So if you're ever looking at these, that'll be clear for you. We already have clerk fees. The costs we've used for this committee have totally gone to the architectural portion and clerk fees mainly. We haven't had a lot of other costs other than that. You'll see sometimes there's other ones that the previous committee had other things done beyond that, but ours have basically been those two areas. So wanted to bring that out for public consumption. And other than that, we will, I would like us to consider, if we can, tomorrow is the closing date for, right? Is it tomorrow, the closing date for the property, that we would be able to get an opportunity as a committee. We could call it a meeting and not without having to have this kind of setup. We've done tours before where we called it a meeting, and so we could have a quorum. The minutes would basically say tour of property and on. So I will try to throw out some dates for people so we can do that sooner rather than later, so people feel more comfortable other than just looking at pictures by our next meeting. So I'll throw that out. I know it's a really busy time of year for everybody, so I'll just throw out as many dates as I can, and you guys just let me know our calendar, and we'll figure out from there. If we get some neighbors to join us, that's fine too, but we'll have to figure out the legalities of whether it's a meeting or a tour and what can be discussed as a committee. So we'll work through some of that once the property is actually in the town's hands as of tomorrow. I do want to add one other thing that I just heard about this afternoon. I know some of the neighbors have seen some of the stained glass that's been removed. That is the church property. The church, part of my understanding is part of the agreement is that they would have access to those. So I believe that started. I thought I heard from somebody that started. So that was the church taking them before they left. So wanted to get that out there to the public as well. And other than that, I believe I'm ready to call for adjournment. Anybody want to make that motion?
I ask one more question?
Surely.
Sorry, always asking
No worries.
questions. Is the courtesy work done by the architects as far as this site goes? Like, does any further effort by them have to be on a new contract?
I think we probably pushed our courtesy as far as we can push our courtesy.
Listen, if I can add, we've been working for the community for a long time. If this committee calls me and asks me for questions, if it's within reason, we're going to continue serving the town, and this committee will provide you information that allows you to help make questions. But further diligence of this particular site will require essentially a new task order. That task order could include things such as environmental assessment, traffic study, more detailed exploration of the building configuration and site layout. Keep in mind that, this is just an idea. It's a vision. Like, could it work if we buy this property? So that's it.
Again, appreciate your doing that. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody else good? All right, and I have a call for adjournment.
Rich Kroll making a motion to adjourn.
And go ahead, Ron.
Ron Feligno, I second that
All
motion.
right, all those in agreement? Adjournment at what time? 8:23. Still, it's stuck so 6 before. Thanks.